Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Mr. Stokowski. I teach AP World and AP Euro. For today's video, I'm going to be doing an AP World crash course. This is the fourth part of the crash course that I've been doing. If you want a link of this actual vocab, it's in the description. The way to do this AP World crash course is if you don't know what I'm talking about or you're kind of not familiar with the things I'm talking about, you want to go back and look them up. I'll be putting up videos later on about different ideas to go forth, but this is the last thing that we left off on from part 3, which is Spain and the Philippines. So as the Age of Exploration is continuing on, which is really important for AP World because basically it's the first time it's together. Spain basically is the first conqueror, or the Spanish Philip II is the first age of absolute ruler. So this is important because the Age of Exploration literally is connected to the growth of European monarchs and the Age of Absolutism. The first absolute ruler was basically Philip II, and he conquered the areas of the Philippines, thus his name is Philip. They would ship silver mined from Mexico and Peru across the Pacific to the Philippines, and basically those goods and silver start to flow into China because they were buying goods from China. This is important because during this Age of Exploration, a lot of silver is flowing from the Americas through Europe and to China, and China is getting a lot of silver in their domain, meaning in their possession. European powers at this time in the Age of Exploration, it all kind of starts off with the idea of Portugal kind of going along with the idea of Prince Henry pushing forth. Spain, unified under the marriage of Isabel and Ferdinand, came wealth of exploration. They expelled the Jews and Muslims and Jews from the Inquisition, which led them in the age of basically pushing forth with Christopher Columbus. Later on, this is a recap, they created a mercantilist economic system. Mercantilism or mercantilism is literally just merchants spreading connections, and the way mercantilism works is that these European countries try to hoard as much gold as possible. Constitutional power in parliament and limited monarchy was created during this era too. You had Henry VIII, the first person to basically put the Protestant Reformation under his domain. Queen Elizabeth brings England into the height, into power, prestige, and France power from trade and colonialization from Louis XIV, highlighted with the Age of Absolutism. Okay, so if you're going to know something, Henry VIII brings Protestant as the major religion of England. Queen Elizabeth basically brings England to become a superpower of her time. She's known with the Queen with red hair. Louis XIV is the one that creates the Palace of Versailles. This is the epitome of absolute monarchs because this is where he forces all his nobles to live, and therefore the power is centralized under his domain because the most powerful people in France are living at his house, Versailles. Later on, Philip II prepares his huge armada to basically attack the English, and that fails. That literally implies that the Queen Elizabeth and England kind of get their power. They become a superpower of their time under this failure of the Spanish Armada, and this basically signifies Spain's becoming an equal partner of balance of trade or balance of power in Europe because they failed. They were a superpower up until about this time because they were the first to come up with the Age of Exploration or really benefit from that age. You have the reign of Philip II becoming the first absolute monarch, the person that wants complete control over an area at the Age of Absolutism. It's like a version you would think of a dictator. The only difference really is an absolute monarch is born into that role. A dictator would assume that role. Other than that, they're kind of interchangeable in the idea for you to learn. Oligarchy is a group of few people that take over, so it's like an absolute monarch, but instead of just one person, it's an oligarchy, it's a group of people. Louis XIV turned the royal hunting lodge into the Palace of Versailles, the most opulent palace ever built, and thus also being in complete control over his people with certain ceremonies that he would hold. If you want anything done in your domain of France, you would have to live there, and then also give credence to him and doing these kind of ceremonies. And through those ceremonies, he basically created his domain over the people, meaning they had to serve him. You have Peter the Great of Russia. He basically puts Russia on the road to becoming a modern power, building the westernization of Russia, building St. Petersburg. This is important because he pushes Russia to keep up with Europe, right? Like to keep up with the Joneses, but instead of the Joneses, it's Europe. After him, he has this enlightened empress called Catherine the Great. She does like the Enlightenment version for Russia, being things like education and intellectual movements. Again, Spain was a dominant force until Philip II wanted to attack England. Spanish monarchy failed. This is a typo. Absolute monarchy and then oligarchy. That's a typo. Here. England at this time emerges as a constitutional government, implying that it has a document with a government. This is after the Glorious Revolution. Prior to that, it was just a monarchy with a parliament that they would dismiss. And then you have people that are pushing forth to even go further than just the Protestant Reformation, trying to purify the Church of England even more. Hence, you have the name Puritans coming in, and then they want to look for a place that they can practice their religion freely, and America is opening up. In France, you have the rise of the Huguenots. The Huguenots were basically Protestants. They pretty much tore France apart through religious turmoil between Catholics and the French Protestants, which are called Huguenots. This all culminated with St. Bartholomew Day's massacre, where there was actually a set-up wedding where they plotted the Catholic-controlled monarchy, tried to set up a plot to kill and killed 3,000 Huguenots, and it's known as the St. Bartholomew Day massacre. After this, later on, the issue of Nantes was created, and this protected Protestants and Huguenots because Henry the Fourth of France converts to Catholicism, saying it's well worth a mass kind of thing, meaning to stop the bloodshed in his own country. Another major Holy Roman Emperor at this time was Charles V. He was overwhelmed by ruling this really discontented area of Central Europe, which is the Habsburg Empire. It was basically being torn apart by the religious ideologies that were spread through the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation basically implied that if a prince chose to become a Protestant, he would break away. He could technically rule his own domain, and thus he would be separate from the Catholic Church's authority. And this caused a lot of turmoil in that central area of Europe. And when Charles V reigns, he actually inherits the Habsburg Empire and the overseas colonies, and he basically abdicates his rule. He gives the overseas colonies, such as the Americas, to his son Philip II, the first absolute monarch, and he gives the Habsburg land, Central Europe, to his brother Ferdinand, and he kind of retires. Again, Peter the Great is known for Westernization. That's another typo there. This is something that I kind of slapped together just for a quick review for my students, so hopefully you kind of just enjoy this or utilize as much as you can. And again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just want to kind of jump in there. You really want to know the age of absolutism, the general idea, and then the biggest ones would be Louis XIV and the Palace of Versailles. Freeing the serfs, the idea of, this is one of those things that kind of comes later on, but this is the idea of emancipation, which is the freeing of serfs, and this starts to basically culminate in places of Russia under Alexander II, and that shows you that they're basically pushing for this new kind of world. Now here you see 1750 to 1900. This is 12 to 15% of your exam. This implies imperialism, Latin American Revolution, French Revolution, American Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. The age of nationalism. The centuries you would use for this would be 16th to 18th century. Contextualization, DBQ, SAQ. Questions of periodization. What is unique about the time period that leads its own time? The East Europe from the U.S. becomes a major player in the world events. These are things that are themes that you would see happening in a general speaking for your AP world. Beginning in the early century, they truly had colonies around the world. It goes from age of exploration to the age of imperialism, people trying to take complete control over it. European stronghold there. World trade networks were dominated by the West, but they started impacting the world. You have the advent of the Industrial Revolution after, which really culminates in a new age of economic commerce, trade, which is a huge one for you. Industrialization and economic development. And the haves and the have-nots, that's Karl Marx. Political, social, economic revolutions, those are all intertwined with the Enlightenment that leads into the American Revolution, which leads into the French Revolution. The French Revolution also leads into the Haitian Revolution, because Haiti was a colony of France. And then this whole area of the world, Industrial Revolution, starts in England, but spreads to the rest of the world. The rise of capitalism under the ideas of Adam Smith, a free market system. And then you have the unifications of major areas of the world coming into fruition, which would be the unification of United States, Germany, and the unification of Italy. Remember, these three are not really, they're there, but they're more landmass rather than political institutions of countries. By about 1750, they all turn into nations. Hence the last bullets here, which would be the idea of nationalism. And then these nations go on imperialistic ways, creating empires. And this is when they start to really control the world and put their teeth into dominance over the world. And this rings true to European powers and the United States. And then colonialism is colonies of these empirical powers, meaning they're like, it's the difference between imperialism and colonialism. Imperialism is the idea of control. Colonialism is that they were once living in one part of the country and now they colonize and live in another part of the country. So they're kind of the same, but they're different too. You have the building of the Suez Canal. Panama canals allow quicker travel. This is crossing the Pacific to the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. That's why the Panama and Suez canals are important, because basically they create a shortcut that you don't have to go all the way around South America to get to the Pacific Ocean. You have new advances of ships, railroads, super important. If you're going to get one from this review here for AP World, you need to know Industrial Revolution, French Revolution, Haitian Revolution is super important. You'll get that more than the American Revolution. You want to know your Enlightenment. Where else are we? Again, the Industrial Revolution is super important. Political institutions from Adam Smith, and the haves and the have-nots, it's Karl Marx. Karl Marx literally becomes the foundation of communism and socialism, the ideas of it, and Adam Smith becomes the foundation of capitalism. Okay, and that's the new economic term that's coming in. You want to know imperialism and you want to know colonialism for AP World. These are important, but they're not going to be as focused. You'll be focused when you're taking AP Euro, AP US History, because those are more focal points of that. Here where we leave off, Industrial Revolution, huge migration movements from Americas, from Europe and Asia, they start to move. Industrial Revolution set up countries around the world, factories needed raw materials, so this basically spurs on the triangular trade system, the need for raw materials to be made in the mid-1700s and later on, so they get it from the New World, and then that's also when you start seeing slavery exponentially grow in the New World. Economic advances and development created countries controlled by Europe, but a lack of development and still plagues Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia today. So the remnants of the Industrial Revolution are still felt, and the Atlantic slave trade and the triangular trade network are still felt of the impact of economics and society and political institutions from this period of time. Serf and freeing the slaves, political revolutions, and independence movements. Here you have the Industrial Revolution. Again, it starts in Great Britain, and basically it's industry factory. Things that were once made by people are made by machines, and the railroad system is one of the biggest ones that they'll talk about for the 1750s. If it's a little later on, they'll talk about the communication systems of the telegraph wire, which is basically improves communication, so improves political and economic dominance of one area over another. Some countries made by government and industrial revolutions, Russia and Japan. They love to compare the Industrial Revolution of Japan with, let's say, Britain, and that's because Japan is the first nation of Asia to really go for this Industrial Revolution and its push forth. And I've seen that a lot in DBQs, LEQs, and all that stuff for AP World. Laissez-faire economics is basically the idea of a free market system, the invisible hand. That's an Adam Smith reference. It's important to know Adam Smith because he's great to pop in anywhere for an SAQ, DBQ, LEQ, because he's the economic system that's the foundation from the 1700s till today. And Karl Marx is good because he's from the 1850s of communist and socialist beliefs to today. So those are two groundbreaking things that you can go and use them as outside resources or filling out information, or not filling out information, but supportive evidence or details. Great to work, and they're used in any type of government or institutions you can think of. Britain has advantages for the Industrial Revolution starting there. It has the natural resources and ports. It basically makes it viable, so it's like the location, and that'll be Britain. Agriculture spurs on industry. The Industrial Revolution was made possible first by farming fields of Western Europe. They utilize a lot of the farming techniques from the Dutch. They start to grow a lot more food in England, and that food creates a population boom. With the population boom and food that's sustainable now through this new farming techniques, you have the onset of the Industrial Revolution. Also, Britain sits on a lot of huge coal deposits, so they have the energy source too. So it's like the perfect storm for the revolution to start there. Jethro Tull invents a new seed drill, which helps the farming techniques to make more agricultural production, which makes more food for people. The ownerships of enclosure method, which is an important one for you. This is basically the idea of enclosing plots of land to create more product from that land. Millions of acres were enclosed. This is through the governmental process that England had and not other countries had. The population multiplied through the agricultural revolution. Sustainable food means more people. James Watt created a new steam engine. Basically, this is important because this is the first idea of engine, which basically powers the Industrial Revolution in our world today. Again, steamships, locomotives are really important. Smelt is just basically creating stronger iron, meaning now they're being able to create things from bridges and trains and engines and so forth, and then later on buildings. Enterprise is basically the idea of entrepreneurs making their own businesses, and that goes into Adam Smith. And the first industry that gets industrialized is the putting out system, the textile industry. So this putting out system, which was a cottage industry, a mom and pop one, and family homes, later on is transferred to a factory, and the factory basically revolutionizes the production of cloth, textiles. So that's the one that they always ask. James Hargreave improves the spinning jenny, which basically improves the idea of weaving cloth, weaving threads, creating threads. Eli Whitney improves the cotton gin, which deseeds cotton, which creates a need for cheaper labor, which is slaves, which has utilized the idea of the increase of slaves in the Americas. George Stephenson developed the first steam-powered locomotives, which basically changes the transportation method across land forever. Think about it, it was only water that you can transport huge things. Land you would have to walk with animals and horses and stuff. Now you can put it on a train and you can take it wherever you want, and it's huge for the transportation of goods. You have Liverpool to Manchester, and that's the first major rail line. The social impact of it will be urbanization. That's huge. People are moving down to these cities where the factories are to get jobs, because there's no more jobs in the farmland too, because it's all being enclosed. Pollution increases. Bourgeoisie, which are these middle class people that own the mines and factories, start to get money. So it's a new social economic class. Harsh conditions in the factory, 12 to 16 hours work days, exhausted workers, very unsafe. You might get something here. In mines, it was actually worse off, much more unsafe than working in a factory. Boys and girls were working, so child labor laws. So you would have something like that talking about the social impact of the Industrial Revolution on family units. So that might be a question you might get. Thomas Malthus, the ideas of population explosions, not as much, but basically being like population needs to be controlled by natural causes. Here you have industrial capitalism again, the idea of Adam Smith, a Enlightenment idea being applied by the middle class to utilize it for economic profit. Here you have steel industries, and started in England again. Needed cotton, so they went to Egypt, America, and then colonialization kind of took wind with it. Here there's a crash course for the Industrial Revolution, and I'm going to leave it off here with part 5. I'll start off with Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia. And then, again, if you like the video, like and subscribe to my channel. This is just a quick crash course. If you don't know it, you don't know it. Go back into it. If you don't know, you don't know it. If you don't know it, go back into it and then see what you might want to go into notes, and then go from there going forward. Okay? Again, have a great day. Like and subscribe. All that jazz.